It's time for the final reveal. I have finished the tote bag panel with the 3/8" lattice background stencil. It has been cleaned by soaking and blocking, and during the blocking it was trimmed, so all the excess has been trimmed away. And this is the final result. So in this tutorial, we have covered the methodology, we have covered the thread path, we've covered the thread selection process, we've worked on this actual project together, and now I have shown you the final results after supplying you some tips and tricks with working in those nooks and crannies. Let me also reveal the vintage postcard that I'm working on. Many of you are new to quilting and may not understand the method of blocking. And when I talk about blocking, I'm going to turn it this way for you so you can see it. This is the way that I intend for the postcard to finish. Blocking is taking your finished piece of work and wetting it, dampening it enough to where you can help manipulate, pull the quilt sandwich back into its place. You know, after we do a lot of quilting, especially dense quilting, the quilt sandwich actually begins to shrink. With wetting it and blocking it, we can actually pull it back out to its original form and manipulate it so that it's squared. This is how really nice competition quilts are done. Any piece that you want to share as an heirloom, this is something that you might want to consider. So since this piece was going to have to be soaked and cleaned because I needed to remove the registration marks, after I soaked it, I blocked it. Now, this is a simple blocking. I just merely used my template here and placed it where I knew I wanted to make my cuts, and made sure that all the elements that I wanted was in there by stretching and pulling. The actual method of blocking is done using squares. Some people use laser squares, rulers, but you're actually wanting to have straight edges. With competition quilts, you are actually judged on whether the edges of your quilt are square and straight. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to take these pins out. I use these corsage pins. They're great anchors for this process. Every once in a while I grab my flimsy little, for a teeny weeny little project, and I use these. But when I really want to dry this really straight, I use my corsage pins. And you have to understand that when you're pulling and manipulating, as it dries, it's still wanting to shrink, because that's the nature of the batting. If, especially like this is an 80-20, the cotton's going to want to shrink. So this is how you minimize the shrinkage on something that you really want to display the beauty of. Okay, so let me move this aside. This is just a piece of pink insulation board. It is approximately 1 inch thick. I would not recommend going thinner because you definitely want a place for these pins to anchor into the board. And then I just have a simple hand towel laid down for this process. I keep a small board ready to work with these vintage postcards. These actually come in large sheets that you can break. They're perforated into sections that you can actually break and make smaller pieces. I've actually used 5 large boards and placed them together side by side, 3 by side, and 2 at the bottom to accommodate a large queen size quilt that I needed to block. The actual way of blocking, especially for competition quilts, and if you want to really get particular in the method, is I use a piece of felt, flannel, and I like the white. I go with white, just simple white, and I will take my ruler and I will square it off for the area that I need it. So say I want the edge of my quilt to be over here so that I have a little bit more room to my right to accommodate a larger quilt. I'm going to come in about 1.5 inches, 2 inches. I have this felt folded in two so that it has more absorption when you lay it down. You'd like that felt to kind of take that moisture and help distribute everything. Sometimes the quilts that I put on here are a little bit more damp than I'd like to. I like to let them drain and then roll them in a towel and lightly press on them to remove as much excess moisture as possible, and then begin this process. The next thing you're going to want to do with your ruler is, and I'm going to slide this down so that you can see the corner. So you want to take a permanent marking tool, and this is my new favorite. It's a Pentel gel roller for fabric. I bought these in a box from Amazon, and it's got a finer point so that you'll get a nice crisp line when you draw your corner. But basically you want to draw from the left side to the right across horizontally, and from the left side down vertically, all right? And so we're basically making our own permanent square. And I try to get that corner as best I can. So there we go. There's a permanent square. Now what you'll do, I'm going to use a piece of paper to demonstrate this for you, since that is still wet. Take my advice. Do not do this right after you have laid down permanent ink. You can also use a finer point Sharpie for this, but let this dry 24 to 48 hours before you do anything. Take it from my experience. You may think it's dry, you may touch it and think it's dry, but when you lay the corners of a quilt down that are damp, it will bleed into your quilt. So I'm telling you, don't give yourself tears. Listen to the advice. So basically, you're going to start at this corner, and you're going to align the corner of your quilt across this line and down the vertical. All right, and that is your first 90-degree corner, and then you're going to pin that corner, and you're going to go along and you're going to pull and gently manipulate, and you want to switch this around. You want to start with the top, and you want to pin where you can just see that line, all right, with your quilt. And this will be a quilt that you've already cut in the squaring off process, and you're manipulating it to keep it straight before it dries, okay? So you're going to be aligning your quilt, and depending on how much you've quilted, how much dense quilting, how much you may pull, you're just going to have to learn through experience. You're going to put a pin every 2 inches, sometimes every 1 inch, depending on the work that you're doing. And you're going to go all the way across until you are finished and you get to this corner. Then you're going to do the same process again, down the left-hand side, all the way down till you finished pinning your project here. Then you're going to grab, you may need one, you may need 2 rulers. I have a nice long ruler here. This is my 24 incher. You will line this up with your horizontal line, There's no more drawing. Now you're going to be using your ruler for the edge of your quilt to touch. So pretend this extends over there. You're going to be pulling and then tacking down the edges with your pins all the way down. Then when you get to the bottom, you may have another ruler. Keep this original ruler here and have another ruler here at the bottom lined up. And then you're going to start pulling the bottom, what's remaining of the quilt, and pinning it. Now, at this point, you might have more fabric, more quilt than you think because you've been stretching and pulling. So you may have to undo some pins and redo it. It's just a process of making sure you have everything squared once you have all that quilt manipulated back into its original shape. So that is blocking. So once it's all pinned, you just set it and forget it. Usually overnight, 12 hours, and my quilts are done. It just depends on how many layers of batting that you have in between, how big your quilt is, and of course how damp it was when you blocked it. So I'm going to go ahead and leave you. I'm going to fold this up because I don't want that to touch the quilt, but let me bring the tote back in so that you can have a final look-see. There's the tote, and here is the postcard ready for me to cut and start embellishing before it makes its final journey with the backing put on. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and I really sincerely feel that the way I've presented it to you will help you master it. Again, you can find these stencils, the background lattice stencils, in my online store at MartiesQuiltingCreations.com. I have a link for you available in the description area. And please keep in touch and let me know how you do with your projects using these wonderful stencils. Take care, everyone.